What's going on, guys? I am hooked up to a really nice walleye right now on a slip bobber, and slip bobbers are definitely one of my favorite methods for catching walleyes basically all through the summer. And it starts when they're shallow, you know, like right now we're catching them in 6-8 feet of water, and I fish them all the way out to 30 feet with slip bobbers. And in this video, what I want to do is go over 15 slip bobber tips that are going to help make you a better walleye angler, and definitely hopefully up your game when it comes to fishing slip bobbers for walleyes. Let's let this fish go and get into the tips. All right, guys, let's get into these 15 tips, and make sure you stick around to the end because I'm also going to show you how to hook leeches, night crawlers, and minnows properly for a slip bobber rig. So let's get started with tip number one. And tip number one is to use braid or monofilament on your slip bobber rods. Do not use fluorocarbon because that's going to sink. It's going to create a bow in the line between your rod and the bobber, and you're going to have to reel that up before you can set the hook. Braid and monofilament both float. You'll be able to keep that line on the surface at all times. And I really like the 4-carrier braid versus the 8-carrier slick braid, just because these bobber stops actually hold better on that braid. So get standard braid or mono and you should be all set. Now, tip number two is to use a high-vis line. Whether you're using braid or monofilament, I always use a high-vis yellow or green so I can track that line at all times and see if I'm getting slack in it, see if there's a bow in it, and just to keep track of that loose line between your rod and the bobber. It's a really good idea to use high-vis braid on your slip bobber setups. So the next tip is use the wind to your advantage. Wind is your friend. Wind is going to help you get closer to the fish. They're going to be less spooky when that bobber splashes down. It's going to add a little action to your setup. Now, if it's really windy, what I typically do is I switch from the jig to more of a split shot and a plain hook. And what that's going to do is absorb some of that up and down from the bobber by having that loose trailing end, and your bait's not going to be moving around super aggressively in the waves. It'll kind of trail behind that sinker and be more natural looking. So don't be afraid to fish in the wind, but if it's real windy, go with the split shot and you'll have a lot better luck. Now, one other tip when it comes to the wind is to always fish downwind of your boat if possible. So if I spot fish, I'm going to spot lock upwind of the fish. I'm going to fish off the back of my boat so that the wind is always pushing the bobbers away from me. If you cast them into the wind, you're going to get a lot of slack line as that bobber starts drifting towards you. You might get it caught in the trolling motor. There's all kinds of problems that can happen when you try and fish upwind. So always try and set up so that your bobbers float away from your boat, and you'll have a lot better luck just controlling your lines when you're fishing with slip bobbers. Now, getting that bait the right distance off the bottom is super important when it comes to fishing with slip bobbers. The one thing I can tell you is to set your bait higher than you think. Walleyes will go up a long ways to hit a bait, especially in clear water, and you always want that bait above them. So err on the side of too high rather than too low, and you'll be surprised how far those walleyes will move up to hit your bait. But if it's sitting on the bottom in the muck and the weeds, there's no way you're catching walleyes on that bait. They will not see it. So you definitely want to go err on the side of too high. All right, the next tip has to do with setting your depth. Now, here's a way to measure how far you actually are off the bottom. Read the rod length on your rod description. This is a 7'6" rod. I can set my bobber stop exactly one rod length, and I know I'm at 7'6". And from there, I can add a half a rod length, a quarter rod length, and I can get pretty dang close. If I know where that bottom is, I can get it right where I want it. And that's a great way to just kind of get a really quick measurement of how far to set that bobber stop off the bottom. Now, the next tip is for your bobber stop itself. You do not want your bobber stop slipping, and I've had that happen on slick lines especially, or maybe I didn't get the knot tight enough. One way to eliminate that problem is to double up your knots. So slide 2 bobber stop knots on. That way you know for sure your knot is not slipping and it's not going to move from where you set it. If you've ever struggled trying to get braid through a slip bobber, this next tip is for you. So what I do when I'm threading braid through a slip bobber is I get it started and I put my mouth on the other end of the bobber and I just create a little suction and it pulls that braid right through, and I'm able to thread it with ease, no problem whatsoever. So great tip for rigging. It's going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to threading a slip bobber. Now, here's a tip for you forward facing sonar guys. Instead of a lead jig, use a tungsten jig on your bait setup. The reason is that tungsten is going to show up a lot better on forward facing sonar. It's a harder metal, it gives a better return, so you can really track where that bait's at in relation to fish in the bottom. And that's one tip I definitely have learned to use since I've started using forward facing sonar. That works really well. I like the VMC Moon Eye tungsten jig, 1/8 ounce, that's what I've got on here. And I will leave links in the description for everything that I talk about in this video. So check the description if you want to pick some of these up or anything else I'm talking about here. But that's a great tip for just being able to see that presentation really well on your forward facing. Now obviously slip bobber fishing is a live bait endeavor, right? We're typically using crawlers, leeches, or minnows. Anytime you're using live bait, you can end up with fish swallowing the bait. One remedy to that is to use small circle hooks. I like a size 2 or 4 circle hook. And what that's going to do is pull out to the corner or the edge of the mouth before it hooks the fish. And that's going to keep you from gut hooking most of your fish. Now another bonus to that is it's going to hook pike in the corner of the mouth as well. And it's going to lead to fewer bite offs if you accidentally hook a pike. Now when you set a hook on a circle hook, make sure that you're just winding down and tightening the line up. You don't jerk it, because that's the way they're designed to work, is to slowly pull out of the mouth and then just snag the corner of the mouth. So don't set the hook, and use circle hooks if you want to protect some of those fish from deep hooking. Now, unlike when you're fishing circle hooks, when you get a bite on a slip bobber with a conventional hook or a jig, you want to reel down first until you feel that fish and then set the hook. The reason is there's slack created when you're going horizontal to your bobber and then vertical. You have to take up that slack and kind of pull that triangle open before you can set the hook. Otherwise, you're really not putting any impact on the end of that line at all, and the hook's not going to drive home. So make sure you're reeling up before you set the hook whenever you're using a slip bobber rig. The next tip seems very self-explanatory, but I've seen a lot of people make this mistake. You need to balance your setup properly. And so you want enough weight between your jig head and your sinkers to make sure that that bobber always comes up when that bait is suspended, but it never completely goes underwater unless a fish actually has the bait. So that's kind of the balance. That's a good rule of thumb for how much weight to put on your slip bobber rig. Now, one thing I found with slip bobber fishing for walleyes in particular is a lot of times they want that bait fairly still. They don't want it moving a lot. And that's when you want to use a jig head. However, there are also times in super clear water where those fish don't want a jig head attached to the live bait. It's too bright, it's too much extra on there for those fish. So what you can do in that situation is actually do a hybrid drop shot rig and tie a hook on or use a drop shot hook with a weight below it. And that's going to pin your bait in place without the extra bulk of that jig. And it's going to make a really finessey bait presentation that stays in one spot and doesn't move around too much for those finicky fish, and works really, really well to pin that bait in place. Now, kind of the opposite of that, when I want that bait moving around a lot and I want some extra color on it, like in dark water, and I want it to have that more floaty, drifty look, but I also want something on there that's going to attract the fish, that's when I use these Billy Rub scented nuggets. And they actually glow as well, but they're just a scented little egg-shaped plastic you can slide on the hook. Gives that bait a little bit of extra color and kind of makes it stand out in that darker water, but still allows that bait to kind of float freely without weighting it down. And it also adds some scent to the bait that the fish love as well. Now, one more tool that I've been using more lately is the Fish Daddy Glow Eye Jig. In dark water and cloudy days, you can put a flashing LED in these things and it just flashes and pulses and it looks like a shiner or something flashing in the sunlight. And it glows at night. You can put a glow stick in it or a rattle. So they're really, really useful to kind of change up your presentation, give those fish something a little bit different looking, and really attract fish in dark water. So in super stained water, low light conditions, that's a really good addition. And again, I'll leave a link below for those glow eye jigs as well. So there you have it, guys. There's 15 tips for fishing with slip bobbers. Now, before I get into the 3 ways that we hook leeches, crawlers, and minnows, I just wanted to let you know that I do have a full tutorial on slip bobber fishing for walleyes. I'll leave a link down below for that video. If you're new to slip bobber fishing, that's going to tell you every single thing you need to know to start slip bobber fishing effectively. It's going to include a few of these tips, but definitely not all of them. So these videos kind of go together, and definitely want to watch that one if you haven't seen it yet. All right, now let's get into those 3 ways to hook live bait on a slip bobber rig. Number one is your leech. A leech is typically going to be hooked in the big end where the sucker is, and that's going to allow that leech to kind of swim away from the hook, and that's the typical scenario that you want. Whether you're using a jig or a plain hook or a circle hook, doesn't matter. Now, one tip in cold water is to hook the leech a little bit further forward in the side, and that's going to keep it from balling up on the hook as much. But typically, you're going to want to hook it right by the sucker. A night crawler, you're going to want to hook on the end of the crawler. You want that night crawler dangling, and you want the trailing edge of it to kind of follow your hook or your jig. Now, typically with a hook, I'm just going to hook it 3 times in the end, and with the jig, I'm going to thread it on and push it over the hook keeper. Now, those glow eye jigs I talked about actually hold a crawler really well because you can kind of slide it up through behind that plastic collar where the LED goes, and it actually pinches it tight and holds it on there. So that's a good tip as well when it comes to hooking crawlers. Now, minnows, there's 2 different ways I hook minnows on a slip bobber rig. Number one is going to be through the back by the dorsal, and that's going to make that minnow want to swim down and away from the bobber. It's not a good way to hook one if you're dragging that bobber, however. If you're going to be moving or drifting with the bobber and pulling it behind you, you want to hook that minnow in the snout or through the lips to make it trail and follow that jig. But anytime you're stationary fishing, hook it behind the dorsal fin, and that should work great for you. That minnow's going to struggle trying to get away from the bobber and look like a wounded prey. So thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel again so you don't miss anything. Check those links below, and we'll see you in the next one. Get hooked up.